Good evening. My name is Tim Andrews, and thank you for joining us for this live interactive telephone town hall. We are hosting tonight's event to give Congresswoman Spamberger the opportunity to speak directly with you and answer your questions about the issues facing Central Virginia families, businesses, and communities. We hope you are staying safe. And now, as I mentioned, this is an interactive forum. We would love to hear questions from you tonight. We'll be taking as many questions from Virginians as we possibly can during this live event. If you'd like to ask a question on your telephone keypad, simply press *3 if you have a question. You'll be placed in line to speak with a member of our staff. They'll take down your name, the area you're calling from, and the nature of your question. Now, the next time you hear your name, you will be live on the call and able to ask your question directly of the Congresswoman. Now, you can also ask a question by submitting one through the portal below our online streaming player. If you'd like to join us online for this event, simply go to spamberger.house.gov/live. Again, that's spamberger.house.gov/live. Once you join us online, you can simply type your question right below the streaming player. Now, if you're watching on Facebook Live tonight and wish to ask the Congresswoman a question, we encourage you to visit that online streaming portal so you can submit your question. Again, that's spamberger.house.gov/live. Additionally, if you'd like to receive updates from our office via email, simply press *6 on your telephone keypad at any time. Again, that's *6, and an operator will collect your email address to receive those important updates. We could receive a lot of questions during this event this evening, but if we're not able to address your question directly, please call our district office at 804-401-4110 anytime during normal business hours. But again, throughout this event, if you have a question you'd like to ask, simply press *3 on your telephone keypad or just type them right below the streaming player if you're joining us online. Now, to start this event this evening, I'd like to introduce Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger with opening comments. Congresswoman?
Hi, everyone. I hope you are staying warm this evening, and I do thank you for joining us. Thank you so much for being with us during this event. My expectation for the evening is that I'll answer questions about what's happening on Capitol Hill, the steps that Congress is taking to combat COVID-19 across our communities, and how we can move forward on several important priorities under this new administration. In this moment, I know that reliable information is extremely important as we work to keep our families safe and our neighbors safe. And I hope to answer as many of your questions or direct you to the correct resources as I possibly can tonight. If we can't find an answer for you, please, or if you don't get a chance to get through to ask the question directly, please do not hesitate to reach out to my office. We are here to support you and here to help. I do have a couple updates that I'd like to provide first related to COVID-19. Just yesterday, I joined a bipartisan group of colleagues for a phone conversation or Zoom conversation with White House National Economic Council Director Brian Dees. And we were speaking directly about the White House proposed relief package and where Congress intends to move forward. This was with a group I'm involved with called the Problem Solvers Caucus. It's a group of half Democrats, half Republicans, and we work aggressively on issues that are important to the American people. And we're an integral part of securing the last COVID-19 relief package. I am glad to see the new administration has a clear focus on the needs of our families and communities. And I maintain that we must continue to act quickly in the coming weeks to move forward with additional relief, in addition to a strategic plan to ensure vaccination distribution. It is a major concern for those of us throughout Central Virginia, how it is that we are distributing vaccines and the speed at which we're doing it. During last month's town hall, you might remember that Secretary Kerry from the Virginia Department of Health and Human Resources joined our conversation. At that point, we were talking about the initial stages of the rollout, and certainly many constituents expressed concerns about the COVID-19 vaccination distribution. And I know this continues to be a real concern. Many people, myself included, are looking for assurances and knowledge of when and how our loved ones will be able to receive the vaccine. And I do share frustrations related to the delayed rollout of the vaccine doses, because it is the successful distribution of the vaccine that will allow us to reopen our community and our economy, our schools, our daycare centers, and regain some level of normalcy into the future. A major reason for the slow rollout is the supply of doses is just simply not adequate to the demand nationwide. According to recent figures, Virginia is only getting about 105 doses per week. Yesterday, the administration made an announcement that they will boost vaccine supplies to states by about 15%. And this is excellent news, but we still need far more doses to reach the essential workers, senior citizens, and other vulnerable individuals throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia. In the face of the shortage, I have been a strong proponent of a national COVID-19 vaccination strategy because we need to ensure that our COVID-19 response is based on science, data, and the public health needs. In the past week, I have been encouraged that the Biden administration is using its authorities under the Defense Production Act to address gaps in our supply chain. Usage of the Defense Production Act is something that I have been aggressively advocating for since the beginning of this pandemic. Here in Virginia, I have heard from many local healthcare professionals who are concerned about shortages of syringes, vials, PPE, and other equipment that will be necessary for a successful vaccine drive. And we are working to ensure that those supplies, those necessary components are in fact available. If you do have any questions related to what's happening at a federal level when it comes to vaccine distribution, please be in touch with my office. And finally, I know that the last month has been particularly challenging for our country and for our democracy. And last week, I hope that Virginia saw an opportunity for our nation to recognize the challenges we face, but also to recommit to working together to address the issues and the challenges that we collectively share and face. As this new Congress begins, I am laser focused on delivering additional COVID-19 relief, but I'm also focused on working with the new administration and my colleagues to deliver large-scale infrastructure legislation, something that has frankly been long overdue. And I'm hopeful that in these conversations about our nation's infrastructure and our need to invest in it, we can make progress in delivering one of my favorite legislative priorities, high-speed broadband internet connectivity to rural communities like those here in Virginia that I represent and across the country. I'll continue to work on many of the issues and healthcare challenges that have been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic, including skyrocketing healthcare costs, rising prescription drug prices, and the disparities in healthcare access and healthcare coverage for minority and underserved communities. This issue in particular is something that we must closely monitor during vaccine distribution. I thank you all for joining me this evening, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Congresswoman, and thank you all for joining us this evening for this live, interactive, healthcare-focused forum. Now, we'd love to hear your questions this evening. If you have a question, again, simply press *3 on your telephone keypad at any time to get in queue to ask a question. A member of Congresswoman Spamberger's staff will collect your questions and we'll try to answer as many as we can during this live event. You can also ask a question by submitting one through the portal right below the streaming player at spamberger.house.gov/live. Again, that's spamberger.house.gov/live. Now, if you're watching on Facebook Live tonight and wish to ask the Congresswoman a question, again, visit that same website, spamberger.house.gov/live, and type your question right below the streaming player. And again, an effort to get to as many questions as we possibly can this evening, try to keep your questions brief so we can answer as many as we possibly can. Our first question comes from Scott 70. Hopefully I pronounced that correct, sir. Thank you for joining us from Fredericksburg. You're live and able to ask your question directly.
Good evening, ma'am. I want to say, first of all, thank you for staying safe. And my question is about the veterans in Virginia. I've talked to numerous ones, and we're all getting the same response that the VA will call us, don't call them. And I've talked to a bunch of friends throughout the country, and the VA's been massively rolling out vaccines. So I was wondering where the disconnect might be.
So specifically, just to confirm that I understand the question, your concern is about the distribution of vaccines to veterans through the VA and the communication challenges that you may have had. Is that it, Scott?
Yes, ma'am, because other veterans in different states have been telling me about how they're rolling out at the VA, and our VA does not seem to be rolling out anything.
Excellent. Well, so Scott, thank you so much for this question. Most definitely, if this is a challenge that you are facing, then it is certainly a challenge that other veterans across our district and across Virginia are facing. What I can do on this particular circumstance is we will follow up with the VA, and I invite you, Scott, to be in touch with our office. We have a dedicated group of constituent service representatives who their job is to work with federal agencies and address the challenges that the people that I represent are facing. So Scott, perhaps someone can take your number. We can follow up with you directly. But to anyone else on the line, if there's a lack of clarity from the VA here locally in terms of vaccine timeframes, we welcome you to give us a call, and we'll help to follow up and ideally provide some clarity on that.
Again, if you have a question this evening you'd like to ask, simply press *3 on your telephone keypad, and we'll get you in line and try to ask as many or answer as many questions as we can this evening. Right now, we have Blanche Toms calling from Richmond. Hi, Blanche. Thank you for joining us this evening. You're live with the Congresswoman.
Thank you, Congresswoman Spamberger, again, for all that you do for the Commonwealth of Virginia. Along with COVID, I'm especially concerned about two very serious, challenging issues and what kind of legislation can be put in place to address these. The first one has to do with disinformation that is going on within all kinds of media, social media and mainstream media, and, for instance, reinstating the FCC Fairness Doctrine or push corporate America to stop funding platforms. The other concern that we all have is domestic terrorism, and what in the world can be done here in terms of checking that through money needed for DHS, FBI, CIA, and how to stop this.
Well, Blanche, I want to thank you for raising issues that I think are top of mind for so many, particularly in light of the insurrectionist attack on the United States Capitol. It has become very, very clear that there are, clear to everyone, I would hope, that domestic violent extremists are in the United States, that we have seen rising numbers of hate crimes, and we have certainly seen the proliferation of disinformation and conspiracy theories, particularly on social media and in the public sphere. So to address the challenges specific to disinformation, I have a piece of legislation that I just introduced. I introduced it in the last Congress, so the 116th Congress. Just for a refresher on your civics courses, each Congress to Congress, we have to reintroduce legislation. So it's a piece of legislation I had pursued last term, but I have just reintroduced it because, Blanche, as you mentioned, related to disinformation, it is a priority. The bill is called the FADE Act, and it is particularly related to information that may be pushed by a foreign agent or a foreign entity. There has been a longstanding, and it's been escalating recently, of foreign entities, foreign nations, foreign agents putting disinformation out onto social media, putting advertising dollars behind it. And by the time, if I share it on social media, you as my friend see it, you then share it again, it can go through the social media echo chamber or ecosystem. And as it moves, people don't realize that it is a promoted or paid content. And so what this bill that I introduced with a colleague named John Katko from upstate New York, this bill would require that those disclaimers that it was purchased by a foreign agent would travel with that piece of information. So if it's a video or what looks like an article, that the fact that it was originally paid content or paid advertising, that disclaimer would travel with it, so that we as consumers of information on social media do understand that we were originally being targeted that information through kind of aggressive means. That's just one step. There's certainly a variety of other things that we must continue to do. Aggressive oversight over social media companies and the types of algorithms that they use, which widely, and there's been so much written on this, do silo people into corners and into edges. The algorithm is meant to push towards the extreme. and certainly working with those entities to try and determine how they might be able to ensure that their platforms are not used to push out disinformation. That's one piece. And then you mentioned domestic terrorism. My background, I'm a former CIA officer. My background is focused on foreign terrorism, but it's a variation on the same theme. It is those who wish to affect some sort of change, political, social, cultural, through the threat of or the utilization of violence. And certainly that is what we saw on January the 6th, an effort to thwart the joint session of Congress through the use and the threat of violence. This is certainly something that we had legislative efforts related to further enabling law enforcement to address domestic violent extremism in the last Congress, and certainly I think that will be a top of mind issue. But I am grateful to see that the incoming administration and the incoming Department of Justice, outside of the legislative side of things, will be pursuing domestic violent extremism as a top priority for prosecutors to be able to go after these criminal networks and to assure that we are doing everything possible to keep our community safe. But the impetus really does fall on all of us to ensure that we are checking sources and information. When Blanche talked about disinformation, there is so much information out there. It can be dizzying at times, and it is in that space where we start to not be able to tell the truth from the fiction and the truth from the lies, that bit by bit conspiracies and disinformation can create real divides and challenges for our society. So thank you for that question, Blanche.
Congresswoman, our next question comes from one of our folks joining us online here in Virginia, Rick Eaglin, and I'll see if I get this question correctly. Many people do not have access to go online to get the vaccine information. Is there a way these people could be linked with family members or volunteers to help manage the vaccine rollout?
That's a great question, Rick. That's a great question, and I appreciate it. So just today, this afternoon, the governor has announced that that the vaccine signups are going to be managed at the state level. So far, it's been hyper local, but it is going to be a more dedicated statewide focus. I think this is a tremendous suggestion. It may be something that's already in place, but I will follow up with the state and with Dania Vula, who is the former health director for the health department in Central Virginia, the Henrico Richmond area, and is now running the vaccination program. So I'll follow up with his office directly tomorrow. For some of the updates that might be coming out of our follow-up, I'd love to make sure that everyone is aware of the things that we're doing. So anyone listening, you can sign up on our website at spamberger.house.gov for a newsletter. We send it out weekly. It's all legislative updates, useful information. We don't spam you too much, I promise. But ideally, we'll get an answer to Rick's question, and we'll provide that information out to everyone via the newsletter. But Rick, thank you for raising that. I'm not sure if there is an alternate way for those who don't have internet access. But I will follow up and find out.
Up next, we have Paula Carter from Henrico. Hi, Paula. Thank you for holding this evening and joining us for this interactive telephone town hall. You're live with the Congresswoman.
Hi, good evening, Representative Spamberger. I wanted to ask a question about when do you anticipate COVID-19 relief being sent out? And also, with last time, I know it was based on your 2019 tax returns. What if, 2020 was a very different year? What if that in no way reflects what your earnings were in the year prior, to a significant extent, to where the hardship is greater? Is there any recourse for that?
So, Paula, thank you so much for this question. The two parts of it: when is COVID relief getting sent out? And so from the bill that we passed in December, the COVID relief bill that we passed, which would have included a host of relief elements, funding for schools, funding for vaccine distribution, support to individuals with increased unemployment benefits, rental assistance, food security dollars, and direct stimulus payments. that bill was signed into law in December, and those stimulus checks, which were $600 per person, have already begun to be deployed out. So for those who have a direct deposit or who have information on file with the IRS, that should have already arrived to you. For those who would be receiving checks, the process is a bit slower. We're expecting it to be faster than it was certainly in the spring. So that first amount has already been out. Now, in my conversation in my introductory comments, I said that I had met with the chief White House economic director to talk about COVID-19 relief, and this was something that we discussed and made a priority. And early indications, at least from what the White House supports, and certainly what Congress and the legislation we will put forward, is that the plan is for any future stimulus payments or relief checks that Congress does authorize or that the White House pursues will be based off of 2020 earnings. Certainly when we authorize those first relief payments in the late spring of 2020, using the 2019 filings was the vehicle that we had. But Paula, you raised an excellent point, which is that there are many, many families and many individuals who were stable or did very well in 2019 and 2020, and COVID, which of course is the challenge that we're trying to address, really upended everything. So there's no details yet on how that might be implemented from on the executive branch side of things with the White House. But members of Congress speaking with the White House had said that that's a priority and one that they agree with. So we'll have to figure out how to make those numbers work and how to, be able to look at those filings. But that is an important shift that I think everyone is on the same page that we should make.
Up next, Congresswoman, we have Hattie High School calling in from Richmond. Good evening, Hattie. You are live with the Congresswoman. Please ask your question, ma'am.
Good evening, Congressman. My question is, why are the Democrats going the route of impeachment for Donald Trump, knowing that the Republicans have already said they will not vote to convict him?
Well, thank you for your question, Hattie. So I think this is a basic question of justice and of law and order and of accountability. And so in the House of Representatives, it was us who voted to essentially the equivalent of indict the President of the United States for incitement to insurrection. In the House of Representatives, our responsibility is to put forth a potential impeachment. And constitutionally, those are the repercussions that are laid out for high crimes, misdemeanor, bribery, and treason as committed by the President of the United States. So earlier this month, we did vote to impeach the president, the now former president, on the charge of incitement to insurrection. That's equivalent of us indicting him, and then it moves to the Senate for the trial. So the president has already been impeached, and at this point, it is on the Senate to conduct the trial. I think that there are some senators who have already determined which way they will or will not vote, but I think it is vitally important, and I think it is the responsibility of the United States Senate to conduct a trial with evidence and information and witnesses before determining whether or not they will convict or acquit. Our responsibility was that of indicting him, essentially, and impeaching him. And I think it's an important step for history, quite frankly, for there to be a trial to determine whether the United States senators, as jurors in that trial, believe that he is guilty or innocent of having incited an insurrection. And this is such a profound time in our nation's history that I personally think it is incredibly important that the Senate does its duty and hears the evidence, conducts the trial, and then votes at this time. And ma'am, I would say that I believe that the United States Senate, I have trust that they can focus on their legislative duties, their oversight duties, and in this case, their duty to conduct a trial in an efficient and effective manner.
If you're joining us live this evening for this telephone town hall on your phone and you'd like to ask a question of the Congresswoman, simply press *3 on your telephone keypad. If you're joining us live online at spamberger.house.gov/live, if you'd like to ask a question, just type it right below the streaming player. Right now we have Robert Thompson calling in from Barbersville. Good evening, Mr. Thompson. You're live with the Congresswoman.
Yes, ma'am. How you doing?
I'm doing fine.
Sorry about that. I'm a little nervous, and I stutter when I'm nervous.
That's okay. That is absolutely fine. Take your time.
Sorry about that. Anyway, I was wondering when the schools are going to reopen 100%. The reason I'm asking is because we have 7 children of all ages, and we also have a daughter that is deaf and gets transported from Orange County to Virginia School of Deaf and Blind daily, and is really missing out on immersion into the American Sign Language and the deaf culture. And I would like to cite just a few articles that I know about here. The American Academy of Pediatrics says school transmission of COVID-19 is extremely rare. Data Policy Guide to Reopening Schools from the JAMA Network. The rash of student suicides that push Las Vegas schools to partially reopen. The mental illnesses with the depressions and the students are really bad that I'm seeing. And also no link between schools reopening and COVID-19 spread, study finds. CDC researchers, in-person schooling has resulted in hardly any spread of the coronavirus. Mm-hmm. So I was just wondering if you've heard of anything that we could start pushing to open up schools for the betterment of our children.
Yeah, well, Robert, for starters, I want to thank you for this question. I have 3 children. Certainly, on the days when 3 feels busy, I will think of you, Robert, and your 7 wonderful children. But for starters, in the county where we live, the kids are still 100% virtual. Across the 10 counties that I represent, each of the school districts have made slightly different decisions, slightly different plans to return. Some are hybrid, some are back. Each school district, and it is at the school district level that these decisions are being made, has made slightly different decisions. I will say that with the new administration coming in, one of the priorities has been to create a national vaccination strategy. And this is something that's new. Unfortunately, in the prior administration, there wasn't a national strategy. It was predominantly left to the states. And so while each state has taken a different approach to how they distribute vaccines, it is vitally important that we up overall production, that we up overall component production and manufacturing. And by components, I mean syringes and PPE. And the like, so that vaccines can be distributed readily. But one of the priorities of the Biden-Harris administration listed in their national vaccine distribution plan is to get schools open. Opening schools safely is vitally, vitally important. Robert, you mentioned a variety of articles about the health of children, the experience of children, the stress, the social well-being. And so I'm familiar with many of the articles that you mentioned. As a parent, as a representative, I know that this is absolutely vital for us to be able to open our schools. My hope and expectation is that with the increased purchase of vaccinations that will be coming to the states with the use of the Defense Production Act, that we will be able to prioritize and strengthen vaccinations to teachers, which teacher-to-teacher transmission is one of the major risks. Having read a variety of articles about what are the risks of transmission within schools, I would like to see schools opened as soon as possible as soon as possible and safe. And so I think that in terms of the time frame for what that will be, again, county to county, it is a little bit different. But from a federal perspective, among the things that I have focused on in the legislation, the COVID-related relief that we just passed in December included billions of dollars for support to schools so that they can ensure that they have, be it the cleaning supplies or the PPE or other elements to be able to open safely, and then billions of dollars in vaccine funds to ensure that states and moving to the future with a more federalized, federally supported plan that we can ensure vaccinations across the board to certainly to teachers and administrators and all those who work in a school, administrators, custodians, and anyone who would be in those school systems.
Our next question this evening comes from the Henrico area. Daryl Nolan, you're live, sir, and able to ask your question of Congresswoman Spamberger. Hi, Daryl.
Hello?
Yes, sir. You're live. Go right ahead.
Hi. My question deals with what is going on with the United States Postal Service. I and many of my friends for the past couple of months have been getting mail that is 2 to 3 weeks late. We can't understand, and in fact, some of our bills are saying that it's due in 1 day. That's what we got today.
Oh my goodness!
And we've even gotten past due and had to pay late fees. We don't understand what's going on at the post office.
Daryl, there had been significant reports of delays in postal services, certainly over the summer and into the early fall, which then continued somewhat into the holiday months with the usual holiday delays or holiday lengthened time of delivery. Thank you for bringing this to my attention. We can follow up with the Postal Service. Again, as I mentioned, our office does work with other federal agencies to address some of the challenges that constituents are facing. We have gotten a lot of reports of delays, particularly in the August, September, October timeframe, and then around the holidays. But into this new year, this is not something that we've heard about as much. So Daryl, I think we would have collected your information. We can follow up with you directly. But for anyone else who is experiencing delays, if it is a significant issue, please do let our office know. But we'll be following up with the Postal Service to determine if there's any local challenges that we can help mitigate. So thank you for your question.
Congress, we're going to go back to one of our online questions. This one comes from Bev Holt, wondering, why is Virginia last place in giving the vaccinations?
Bev, thank you for this question. I have asked it myself. Slightly positive news is that the new rankings have us moving up from last place, but we had been at last place. There's a couple issues here at play. One of them is the federal government had. So let me go into the different buckets, right? So one of the priority groups of individuals to receive the vaccination are those living in nursing homes. And under the former administration, the federal government had entered into a contract with CVS and Walgreens to do those in nursing home vaccine, to administer the vaccine in the nursing homes. Virginia in particular, and I actually have the notes on this one, Virginia in particular was one of the very slowest to begin those vaccinations. So the approval for the vaccination came December 11th. They didn't start making the appointments until the 14th of December. They didn't start putting shots in arms until the 28th of December. So that automatically put us on that curve behind some other states. Now, there were only a few states that opted out of this federal program, West Virginia, and so frequently many of the news articles will talk about West Virginia because they have been leading. West Virginia had, by the time we started in Virginia, inoculating seniors in nursing homes, had already provided the vaccine to all of their seniors in nursing homes. So, excellent news for them, but a challenge for us. One of the issues is just in reporting in the data that there's a bit of a delay in the time between reporting and when the numbers actually come out. Now, another thing that should be helpful is the Biden administration just announced a 20% increase in how many vaccines would actually be delivered to each state. So right now, Virginia's getting about 105,000 doses a week. And remember, for the vaccines, that is, each vaccine requires 2 doses currently. So 105,000 vaccines per week. The increase is going to put us at 120,000. So still not nearly enough for what we're going to need. There's other good news on the horizon. Johnson & Johnson has a vaccine that it is moving through the process with right now. And so we should know within the coming weeks whether or not that vaccine protocol is also going to be approved for additional distribution or for distribution and utilization. So at that point, then we might have 3 different vaccines that we'll be able to produce and utilize across the country. But certainly the governor at the state level, specific to Virginia, had a press conference today and announced a number of efforts to aggressively ensure that Virginia does continue to deliver vaccines and by extension, ideally be among. I would hope that we're among the states, the top vaccinating states in the country.
Let's go back to one of our live callers, Congresswoman Jennifer Tenney, calling in from Culpeper. Jennifer, thank you so much for holding this evening. You are live with the Congresswoman. Please go ahead.
Hi, I'm in Goochland, actually, but I wanted to start by saying thank you, Representative Spamberger, for reading about what you did in the Capitol to make sure that journalists got safe shelter, and thank you very much for that. It's wonderful. I know that with the Biden administration and a Democratic Congress, there are projects coming up, infrastructure building and stimulus spending, and I wanted to make sure that something got on your radar. Readout 10 in Yorktown at Colonial National Historical Park. It's actually the spot, if you know the musical Hamilton, that he sings about in the Battle of Yorktown, the spot that Alexander Hamilton stormed that won the Revolutionary War, essentially. It's falling into the York River thanks to erosion and needs of a big engineering project to save it. And it seems like a really patriotic and wonderful project for us to take on, than something that's been neglected because of austerity measures. And I wanted to make sure that it was on your radar as something to try to get into spending bills coming up. Thank you.
My goodness, Jennifer, it is not on my radar. And you have just put a couple of my favorite things all in one place: infrastructure, conservation projects, and Hamilton. So thank you for that. That is not something that has been on my radar. I will talk to my colleague, Elaine Luria, from the 2nd District, who works on a lot of coastal infrastructure related projects, and ensure that it is on hers, and then join whatever efforts she may have already in the works, but certainly work on them myself. One of the things in the larger conservation space, and in the House, I serve on the Agriculture Committee and the Foreign Affairs Committee. And on the Agriculture Committee, I chair the Conservation and Forestry Subcommittee. And so it's a tremendous opportunity to really focus on the conservation side, and land conservation side, particularly our working lands conservation programs. But as we're looking into the future as it relates to larger infrastructure projects, and the announcement by the Biden administration that they'll be pursuing a conservation corps, I'm excited about the possibilities of what may exist. So, Jennifer, thank you for putting this particular landmark location on my radar, and I will certainly be looking into it.
If you're joining us live for this telephone town hall and you'd like to ask a question, simply press *3 on your telephone keypad, just like Daniel from Chesterfield has done. Hi, Daniel. Thank you for calling in this evening and joining us. You're live with the Congresswoman.
Hi, Congresswoman. First of all, thank you for allowing me to be on the program. I've been hearing over the past week some discussions regarding another bailout package after the rather lackluster $600 bill was passed just a few weeks ago. I've heard President Biden speak about $2,000, and then I've heard him backtrack to say, well, it would be more like $1,400 because we've already received a $600 payment. The question is, where's the money, Lebowski?
Well, everybody, the references to movies and musicals, I appreciate that on this Wednesday evening, Daniel. So there has been discussion about the next steps in terms of another COVID relief package. And just to share with everybody my methodology about how it is that I'm looking at these relief packages, it's ensuring, as it relates to individuals in the economy, it's ensuring that people who have been most impacted by this virus and the economic ramifications have the complementary programs that allow them to survive this time, but also for our economy to remain stable. And so that's extended unemployment benefits, that's rental assistance, that's food security programs, and then that's direct cash payments. In the December package that we did, that's where there were $600 per person relief checks that have at this point already been sent out. In the House of Representatives, we passed a separate bill. It didn't go to the Senate and it didn't become law to increase that to by $1,400 to get that payment at the time, which hadn't yet headed out the door, up to the $2,000 mark. So there's been kind of conversations about 2,000 writ large and then pieced into 600 and 1,400. As of right now, in the initial stages of another COVID relief package, there isn't a specific dollar amount that is kind of the target, if you will. There's been a lot of variety of different. In the December timeframe, it was the 2,000 and then the different components to get there. Headed into this next relief package, I think ultimately the amount of that relief, assuming, and I will be working to ensure that stimulus checks or relief payments are included. I think it'll depend on the time frame that we're actually moving forward with that package, what the final dollar amount is. But from again back to the sort of methodology of how I look at it, I think it's vitally important that we continue to provide increased federal support to the unemployment program. However, if those numbers become decreased, then we have to address that through the direct stimulus checks. And so all of these things I think are complementary in the larger scale. And for those kind of thinking, boy, didn't we just do this? The answer is, yeah, we did just do a COVID relief package, woefully late by the needs of the economy by that standard. But the indicators of where things are with unemployment, with the instability on the ground, particularly for the lowest quartile of earner across the United States, there's still very, very worrisome trends. And so, now is the time that we need to make investments in our economy and in our communities to ensure that we are not facing a housing crisis in particular because of the risk that exists for those who may not be able to pay their rent or pay their mortgage, and that we can ensure that as we're working feverishly to get vaccines in the arms of people across the United States, that we're also not letting our economy slip any further. This is an investment in our future that I think is incredibly important. But the full back to your question, then Daniel, the full details of where we are actually going to find that final determination of number as it relates to stimulus checks is not something that we've worked out or finalized. And we're still in the very initial discussions of it.
Another live caller for you this evening, Congresswoman, Brett Derringer. Hi, Brett. Thank you so much for holding and your patience. You're live with the Congresswoman.
Hi, Congresswoman Spamberger. Thanks for having me tonight. One of my biggest concerns that I have going on right now as someone who's previously worked on Capitol Hill is just the division in our country. And after listening to President Biden's inauguration speech, and as a Republican, I see, the talk for trying to bring our country closer together and individuals closer together. But the biggest concern I keep seeing in the news and in the media is how the Democratic Party typically is, trying to tear down individuals in the Republican Party rather than the policies, which I can understand policy disagreement. But how do you plan to actually try and bring our country together instead of, the Democratic Party just taking us all on? I mean, like I said, policy decisions, I understand we can always have disagreements, but it feels like, just for being a Republican these days, people are having this bad name, and I'm trying to figure out, how do you plan to try and help unify that?
Brett, thank you for this question. I think it's probably a question that's on a lot of people's minds. You framed it from the perspective of a Republican, but I have gotten it from people who view themselves as Democrats, who view themselves as independents, basically view themselves as Americans who wonder, amid what feels like endless levels of division, how can we unify? How can we work together on things? And my answer to that is, and I can speak for what it is that I do, I have made it an intentional practice and purpose to work in a bipartisan manner. I'm a Democrat. I've always been a Democrat. That's my chosen party affiliation. But I find tremendous value in working with people who have a different perspective, a different political affiliation, a different kind of political lens through which they see the world. And I work in a bipartisan manner in Congress on a daily basis. It is a priority for me, and one that I have instilled in the team that I work with, for me to work on legislation with Republicans, for me to develop relationships with Republicans. And I mentioned at the introductory portion, I'm part of a group called the Problem Solvers Caucus. It's a group of half Democrats, half Republicans, a Noah's Ark type of organization. We're currently 28 and 28. And we really run the gamut. We have people who are very, very liberal, and people who are very, very conservative, and people everywhere in between. But the commonality among us is that we want to be together to try and achieve something legislatively, to work on some of the issues that are important to the people we represent. And that is what I am doing. That is my priority. And some of the places where we've been able to really impact was most recently with the COVID negotiations. There had been a breakdown. And frankly, it was a bit of a partisan breakdown. The Democratic leadership liked one number for a COVID package. Republican leadership in the Senate liked another number for a package. And in the middle, there were millions and millions of Americans who wanted us to just hash it out. And that's exactly what it is that our bipartisan group did, is we hashed it out. We debated, we argued, we got frustrated with each other, but we came to real policy agreement that frankly wasn't perfect from my perspective, and certainly wasn't perfect from my colleagues across the aisle perspective, but it's about governing. And just for a point of reference, in the 116th Congress, I co-sponsored or led 558 pieces of legislation, and 80% of those bills were bipartisan, and 20% of those bills were led by Republicans. And so those are places where I was seeking out the opportunity to work with and support good pieces of legislation, regardless of whether or not they were initiated by a Democrat or by a Republican. So far in the 117th, I have introduced 4 of my own bills so far. 100% of those are bipartisan, and I've been co-leading multiple pieces of legislation with Republican counterparts. So really, to get at your question, Brett, there are issues of principle, there are issues of policy priority that we may not agree on across parties. But what we need to come together and unify around is truth, facts, pursuit of evidence, and pursuit of good policy, and debating and arguing in our efforts to try and find the best path forward for a particular piece of legislation is what we have to do. And I don't mean it to be kind of Pollyanna about bipartisanship. I mean it because it's how you govern well. It's how you create legislation that is long lasting. It's how we get away from this place where when X party's in charge, they put this legislation in place, and then Z party campaigns on defeating it or overturning it or repealing it, and then vice versa. That flip-flopping is not And that back and forth, that ping pong, is not helpful for the American people who rely on the folks they send to Washington to work on good policy. And so it is certainly not always easy to pursue bipartisanship and to work to find common ground. But I'll point to one piece of legislation that I've introduced, which is called the Trust in Congress Act. And this is a bill that I introduced with Chip Roy, who is a colleague of mine from Texas. He is a member of the Freedom Caucus. He and I are in very different places politically, many days of the week. But when the COVID-19 pandemic first started, and there were all these reports that members of Congress and members of the Senate had been trading stock, while the American people were starting to react to an upcoming pandemic, the commonality we found is we were horrified by this. Horrified. And horrified by two things. One, that there were these allegations that members of Congress were focused on their own financial well-being at the beginning of a global pandemic, but also horrified that, generally speaking, in news reports, the American people said, yeah, that sounds about right, because that's what they actually expected to be the case. They perceived that lack of integrity or ethics existed there. So Chip and I got together and pulled together an array of members of Congress to introduce a bill that said, if you are elected to the House of Representatives or the United States Senate, you, your spouse, and your dependent children must move any individually held stocks into a blind trust. Or you can sell them, but into a blind trust. Because so long as you are making decisions about where to spend federal dollars, so long as you are making decisions about policy and regulation, you should not also concurrently be controlling the sales and purchase of individual stocks. And so we introduced that bill over the summer, and we just reintroduced it in the 117th Congress with an array of some of the most diametrically opposed on so many other issues members of Congress, because we work to find this place of common ground, and we work to find this place of, an effort to try and rebuild some of the trust that the American people have in elected legislators. And we thought, this is a place where people don't need more reason to trust us. This is a place where we are demanding better ethical standards. And so, we may disagree on a whole host of things, but on behalf of the pursuit of making sure that the American people have a bit more faith in their elected officials, this is something we are going to unify around. So, Brett, I could go on and on with examples, but it takes intentionality. It's something I'm committed to. And, for people listening who have families who've been divided over politics, as has been my own, as have been so many, I think that listening to the now president's speech on Inauguration Day was a call to all of us to try and take down the temperature and the heat in some of our conversations, commit to truth, commit to fruitful debates of policy and those sorts of discussions, but recognize that we have to put our country, our good of our democracy ahead of any political party, or certainly any political spat, and that is vitally important, and that's what I'm working to do. So, thank you for that question, Brett, and thank you for indulging me in my very long answer.
It was a great answer, Congresswoman. And our next question comes to you from one of our online participants joining us at spamberger.house.gov/live. This question comes from Carter Michael Wilson, and the question simply is, how is Representative Spamberger helping the economy?
Well, Carter, thank you so much for your relatively simple question that does not have a relatively simple answer. In terms of how I'm helping the economy right now, the largest challenge facing our economy is COVID and is the associated challenges with COVID. The fact that we are at a place where, from a public health standpoint, as Robert mentioned earlier, schools across the country are open in varied different amounts. And what that has equated to throughout the country, and certainly here in Virginia, is that in some cases, parents are leaving the workforce. That's a challenge for the economy. Certain businesses and business sectors have closed and will likely remain closed long into the future. that is a challenge for our economy, particularly small business owners who have been impacted so horribly by not just the closures throughout the pandemic, but also the challenges of consumer confidence and consumer concern, and the safety regulations that are necessary to now operate their business, particularly small businesses, particularly restaurants throughout Central Virginia. And the impact goes on and on. So the things that I am doing to help the economy, first and foremost, through federal legislation and through support of funding efforts, I have been focused on ensuring continued and strengthened access to the vaccine. I am fully committed and working with the new administration to ensure that we can aggressively pursue vaccination distribution, and have worked and voted on legislation to ensure billions of dollars in support to that. And that's really an investment in the recovery of our economy. There's a variety of pieces of legislation that I have focused on in the last Congress that I will be reintroducing. One particular piece of legislation that I have just reintroduced with a colleague named Fred Upton, who's a Republican from Michigan, is called the Reset for America's Futures Act, or Future Act. And that bill supports training programs and workforce development programs, particularly for those who are most impacted by the pandemic. It is a metrics and data-driven program, and one that should be effective at delivering federal dollars to ensure that those investments in training and helping strengthen the workforce are good decisions that we are making across the country. On other issues related to the economy and how I'm helping the economy, certainly ensuring that we have access to PPE, access to the necessary protective gear and cleaning capabilities and standards to ensure a healthy workforce is a priority. So I'm currently working on a bill that I'll be introducing in the near term that would help support, in particular, small businesses to be able to reopen their doors, follow proper healthcare guidelines so that not only can they keep their employees safe, but that they can also communicate readily to their customer base that they are following particular guidelines and able to do so with the support of federal grants. So those are a couple elements of things that I have been working on to help the economy. And thanks for that question.
Well, we still have time, which is running short. Let's get one more live caller in this evening. Karen Purcell, appreciate you holding this evening and calling in. You're live with the Congresswoman, and you have the last question of the evening.
I, too, want to recognize your bravery in keeping the doors closed so journalists could have shelter. I'm from Henrico County. I've worked on a lot of workforce and training programs in my career, including privately funded, foundation funded, federal contracted funding programs. And this question is related to people with disabilities. And when I call them people with disabilities, this is people with many, many different types of disabilities. And one of the issues, if you have a child with a disability, like the caller who was earlier, who was deaf and blind, who was deaf, is there is very little number counting as far as outcomes and training programs. If you, for example, apprenticeships, parents of people with disabilities are encouraged to look at apprenticeships, but there is no data on how many apprenticeships are ever actually given to people with disabilities. I spent a long time, I finally tracked down a small federal office, and apparently there has been no counting of numbers except for the last couple of years. Even now, that person told me she could not give me a real number on the number of apprenticeships given to people with disabilities. With the amount of federal money going into training programs all over the country, I was absolutely shocked. So I'd like your comment about what you know about that and what you think could be done.
Well, so this is a fantastic question because this is actually not an issue that anyone has ever brought to me in the past, Karen. And I will say that I have worked a lot on issues of disability rights. I have certainly been a supporter of a variety of pieces of legislation, the Disability Integration Act, the Able Age Adjustment Act, the PACT Act, a variety of bills focused on Americans with disabilities. But when it comes to apprenticeships and the statistics that you're mentioning, I will have to look into that, Karen. I will say that I've got a bill that I've been working on that's focused on strengthening youth apprenticeship programs at the secondary and post-secondary level, and we should be introducing that. Well, actually, we did just introduce that one. But as an area of focus, I haven't done much work in the area of or research into the numbers related to apprenticeships for those with disability. So I'm a note taker. I'm taking notes on this, Karen. And I believe that we would have collected your information. If you're open to a follow-up call, I would like to learn a little bit more about your personal experience so that we can see if this might be something that any of my colleagues are pursuing and I'm just not aware, or if there is a vacuum on this front and there's something that we can engage on. So if you wouldn't mind, we'll be following up with you directly. But thank you for raising this question. And certainly if it's on your mind, I appreciate you advocating on behalf of anyone else who might be touched by the challenges of finding an apprenticeship for a child, young adult, or adult with some sort of disability.
Congresswoman Spamberger, thank you so much for taking time out of, I know, your very busy schedule to hold this live telephone town hall this evening. Would you like to close with any closing remarks?
Yes, thank you very much. I want to thank everybody who called this evening, who joined us, who listened in from their home. I look forward to the days when we can all be together across the 10 counties to do town halls in person, which is one of my very favorite things. But in the interim, I'm happy to be able to reach you via telephone or on the internet. I hope you all are staying safe. I know this continues to be a very challenging time. Robert raised the issue of children in school for many families, the day-to-day reality of virtual school or hybrid school, or even the worry of sending kids to school with the ongoing public health crisis is top of mind for so many individuals. We are working aggressively into the new 117th Congress to focus on the issues that matter most to Central Virginia. First and foremost, getting this virus under control, stabilizing our economy, working on lowering the cost of prescription drugs, stabilizing our healthcare system, focusing on investing in the United States, in our communities and our economy through infrastructure, in particular broadband internet infrastructure investments, and ensuring that we're doing everything we can across all policy areas to ensure a more equitable and just community, society, and future for everyone. I hope you all are staying safe. I hope you are doing well. And I want to remind everyone that our office is here to be of assistance. Our office is in Henrico in Spotsylvania. We have a team of folks focused on constituent services. So if you or someone you know is having any difficulties with a federal agency, please be in touch with us. Let us know what your circumstance is. If you are facing a challenge, most assuredly someone else is as well. So please, please do not hesitate to be in touch with us. We would love to be of assistance. And for those who raised really great policy questions tonight, I thank you for the opportunity to comment on the work that we're doing and find new areas for us to focus into the future. And I would end by reminding everyone that we do have a newsletter that we send out every Friday. You can sign up for it at our website, spamberger.house.gov. We provide pretty valuable information and updates on a variety of issues legislatively, what we're working on Capitol Hill, but also updates related to COVID-19 and other issues that matter to Central Virginians. Again, I thank you for your time this evening. I thank you for spending a bit of time with me, and I do hope you're staying safe. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Congresswoman, and thanks to all who joined us for this live telephone town hall this evening with Congresswoman Spamberger. Now, we appreciate the opportunity to answer your questions. I know we were not able to get to all of them this evening, and there were many, but if we were not able to get to your question specifically, and you still were looking for an answer, you can call our district office at 804-401-4110 anytime during normal business hours, or please go to the website, Spamberger.house.gov. Thank you again. Stay healthy and safe. Have a great evening.